Sebastian didn't move. He'd built a career on reading people in the first 3 seconds, and this child was setting off every alarm in his head that his actual security system had missed. "You're 7, he said flatly. 7.5. Isabella tilted her head, studying him like he was a math problem. "And you're Sebastian DeLuca. You run the cleanest operation in the city because you think being invisible makes you powerful. But invisible doesn't mean invincible." She gestured at the gate behind her with the recorder. "Your sensors sweep in a pattern. Left to right, then back again. Takes 8 seconds total. But there's a 4-second gap when they switch directions. A hole big enough for a kid." Sebastian's jaw tightened. He'd paid a fortune for that system. "You broke into my property to give me a security review?" "No." Isabella's voice dropped, losing some of its steadiness. "I broke in because the police won't help, and you're the only person scary enough to make him stop." "Him?" "Charles Laurent. My stepfather." She said the name like it tasted bad. "He's beating my mama. Right now. And he's going to kill her if someone doesn't stop him tonight." Sebastian had heard 1,000 desperate stories. He'd learned to filter out emotion and focus on facts. But something about the way this kid stood there, covered in dirt, holding evidence like a lawyer, voice shaking but eyes bone dry, made him pause. "Call the police." "I did. 3 times this month. They came, asked questions, then left. Charles is smart. He knows how to talk to them. He knows which bruises show and which ones don't." Isabella reached into the pocket of her yellow dress and pulled out a small plastic container, the kind that held sandwich crackers. She popped it open. Inside was a thumb drive, a folded paper, and a tiny notebook. "This is the evidence box." She handed him the paper first. It was a hand-drawn map of a house, labeled in careful printing. Kitchen, living room, master bedroom. Red X marks scattered across it. "That's where the cameras are," Isabella explained. "Charles installed them after the second police visit. He says they're for security, but really they're for control. He reviews the footage every night. Mama can't even go to the bathroom without him knowing." Sebastian unfolded the paper completely. The drawing was detailed. Disturbingly detailed for a child. "You made this?" "I'm good at patterns. And measurements." She pointed at the thumb drive. "That's audio. 6 recordings. The first one is from 2 weeks ago. You can hear him threatening her. The last one is from this afternoon. That's when he started breaking things." Sebastian picked up the drive, turned it over in his palm. "And the notebook?" "Financial stuff." Isabella's face hardened. "Charles works for Bennett Architecture downtown, but he's got money coming in from somewhere else. I found papers in his office. Account numbers. Passwords. He writes everything down because he's too paranoid to save it digitally. Mama says he's hiding money for someone. I think he's stealing." Sebastian's instincts kicked in. Financial irregularities. Offshore accounts. This wasn't just domestic violence. This was leverage. And leverage was a language he spoke fluently. "Why me?" he asked. "Why not a lawyer? A teacher? Someone who actually helps people?" Isabella looked at him like he'd asked why water was wet. "Because lawyers need evidence that stands up in court, and I'm 7. Teachers have to report things to people who won't believe me. But you?" She gestured at the mansion, the guards, the gates. "You don't need permission. You don't need proof that a judge will accept. You just need a reason. And I'm giving you one." She held up the recorder. "Charles isn't just beating my mama. He's using her. She works at Bennett too, senior architect. He makes her sign off on projects she's never seen. Fake buildings. Ghost investments. And if you check, I bet you'll find your name somewhere in those files. Because men like Charles always need men like you to make dirty money look clean." Sebastian's blood went cold. Not from fear. From recognition. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a hostile takeover. And the 7-year-old holding a cracker box had just handed him the keys to the kingdom. Sebastian made one phone call. 2 minutes later, a black SUV rolled up to the gate, silent as a shadow. He opened the back door, and Isabella climbed in without hesitation, buckling herself in like she'd done this 100 times. The driver, Marco, one of Sebastian's most trusted men, glanced in the rearview mirror, eyebrows raised. Sebastian just shook his head. Not now. They pulled away from the mansion, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Isabella sat perfectly still, the evidence box on her lap, her muddy sneakers not quite touching the floor. How far? Sebastian asked. Willow Creek. 23 minutes if we take the highway. 16 if we cut through Parker Street. Isabella didn't look up. She was opening a backpack he hadn't noticed before, pulling out a thick book with a cracked spine. The cover read, Understanding Human Behavior, an Introduction to Psychology. Sebastian stared at it. That's a college textbook. High school, Isabella corrected. I took it from the guidance counselor's office. She wasn't using it. She flipped to a dog-eared page, her finger tracing down a highlighted section. Chapter 7. Aggression and Dominance Patterns. I've been studying Charles for 3 months. He fits the profile perfectly. The profile of a tactical bully. Isabella turned the book so Sebastian could see a diagram showing different types of aggressive behavior. Most people think bullies are stupid, angry and out of control. But Charles isn't like that. He's strategic. He plans. Everything he does has a purpose. Sebastian leaned back, arms crossed. He'd dealt with enough violent men to know she was right, but hearing it analyzed by a 7-year-old felt surreal. Explain. Isabella's voice shifted into lecture mode, like she was presenting a school project. Charles never hits Mama where people can see. Only the ribs, the back, the upper arms, places covered by clothes. That's calculated. It means he knows consequences exist, and he's avoiding them. She flipped another page. He also uses something called intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes he's nice, brings flowers, cooks dinner, says he's sorry. It confuses the victim, makes them think maybe he'll change. Maybe it was their fault, but it never lasts. The textbook says it's the most effective way to control someone because it creates false hope. Sebastian's jaw tightened. He'd seen this pattern before, in interrogations, in power plays. The push and pull. The manufactured uncertainty. And the cameras? He asked. Surveillance as psychological control. Isabella tapped the page. If Mama knows she's being watched, she polices herself. She doesn't call for help. Doesn't try to leave. She's already trapped before he even walks in the room. Her voice wavered slightly. It's like prison, except the bars are invisible. Marco took the Parker Street turn, and the neighborhood started to change. Fewer streetlights. Smaller houses. The kind of area where people minded their own business because getting involved meant trouble. There's something else, Isabella said quietly. She closed the textbook, hugging it against her chest. Bullies like Charles pick victims they think are weak. But Mama isn't weak. She's smart. She has a good job. People respect her. So Charles has to work harder to break her down. He isolates her from friends. Makes her feel crazy. Tells her nobody will believe her. But you believe her, Sebastian said. I know her. Isabella's eyes met his in the dim light of the car. I've watched her shrink. Become smaller. She used to sing while cooking. Now she barely talks. It's like he's erasing her, piece by piece. And if someone doesn't stop him soon, there won't be anything left to save. The SUV slowed as they entered Willow Creek. Neat lawns. Basketball hoops. Minivans in driveways. The kind of place that looked safe on the outside. Which house? Marco asked. Isabella pointed to a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a porch light that flickered. The one with the white fence. Number 47. Sebastian could see a shadow moving behind the downstairs curtains. Large. Pacing. One more thing, Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. The textbook says bullies respond to one thing better than anything else. What's that? A bigger threat. She looked up at Sebastian, her old soul eyes suddenly looking very young. That's why I brought you. The SUV stopped 3 houses down. Sebastian didn't want to announce his arrival yet. He wanted to observe first, the way a hunter watches prey before making a move. Stay in the car, he told Isabella. No. Her voice was firm. If I'm not there, he'll lie. He'll say Mama fell. That she's clumsy. That everything's fine. But if I'm there, he can't pretend. He'll have to face what he's done. Sebastian considered this. The kid had a point. Abusers relied on silence. On hiding. Having a witness, especially their own victim, changed the equation. You stay behind me. Always. If things get dangerous, Marco gets you out. Understood? Isabella nodded. They stepped out of the SUV. The night air was cool and quiet, broken only by the distant sound of a television from a neighboring house. Sebastian's white shirt seemed to glow under the streetlights, stark and clean against the darkness. He'd worn it deliberately. In his world, white meant untouchable. It meant you didn't get dirty because you were above the mess. Tonight, it meant something else. It meant he was impossible to miss. They walked up the driveway, Isabella's small hand gripping the evidence box. Her yellow dress rustled with each step. Sebastian moved like he owned the street, his presence expanding to fill the space. Marco followed 3 paces behind, silent as a ghost. A dog barked from somewhere inside number 45. A curtain twitched at number 49. Good. Let them watch. Sebastian stopped at the Lawrence front door. The house looked normal. Too normal. Fresh paint. Trimmed hedges. A welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home" in cheerful letters. But Sebastian had learned long ago that the worst monsters wore the best masks. He didn't knock. Instead, he pressed the doorbell and held it. The chime rang over and over, an aggressive sound that shattered the suburban quiet like breaking glass. 5 seconds passed. 10. The porch light flicked on. The door opened a crack, and a man's face appeared. Mid-40s. Thinning hair. A cheap button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Charles Laurent looked exactly like what he was trying to be. Ordinary. Forgettable. Safe. But his eyes weren't safe. They were sharp and calculating, already measuring Sebastian, looking for weakness. "Can I help you?" Charles's voice was smooth. Friendly, even. "I think you have the wrong house." "I don't." Sebastian didn't smile. Didn't soften his expression. He just stood there, taking up space, his white shirt catching every bit of light on the porch. "Step outside." Charles's friendly mask slipped for half a second. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Sebastian's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that made grown men reconsider their choices. "Step outside. We need to talk." "I don't know who you think you are," but Charles started to close the door. Isabella stepped into the light. Charles froze. "Hey, baby," he said, his voice changing completely. Softer now. Concerned. "What are you doing out here? It's late. You should be in bed." "Don't call me that." Isabella's voice was ice. "And don't pretend you care." Charles's jaw tightened. Sebastian saw it. The flash of anger that Charles quickly buried under another layer of fake concern. "Sweetheart, you're confused. Why don't you come inside? We can talk about this." "No." Isabella held up the evidence box. "We're done talking. I brought someone who doesn't need to talk." That's when Charles finally looked at Sebastian. Really looked. And Sebastian saw the exact moment recognition hit. Not of his face. Sebastian kept his face out of the news, out of photos, but of what he represented. The white shirt. The stillness. The way Marco stood behind him like a shadow with a pulse. Charles wasn't stupid. He knew what this was. "I don't want any trouble," Charles said carefully. "Then you shouldn't have created any." Sebastian took 1 step forward. Just 1. But it was enough to make Charles take 2 steps back. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let us inside. You're going to sit down. And you're going to answer some questions about your business arrangements. The ones you've been running through your wife's architectural firm." Charles's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Sebastian smiled then. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "And if you make me repeat myself, I'm going to stop being polite." Charles stepped back, and Sebastian walked in. The house smelled wrong. Not dirty. Everything was too clean, actually. Spotless counters. Vacuumed carpets. The kind of clean that came from obsessive control, not comfort. Sebastian had been in enough crime scenes to recognize the difference. Charles had positioned himself in the center of the living room, legs spread shoulder-width apart, arms loose at his sides. It was textbook dominance posturing, the V formation. Stand in the middle of the space. Make yourself big. Force everyone else to move around you like you're an obstacle they have to navigate. It worked on civilians, on scared spouses, on police officers who just wanted to finish their paperwork and leave. It didn't work on Sebastian. Sebastian didn't walk around Charles. He walked straight toward him, closing the distance until Charles had 2 choices. Hold his ground and let Sebastian invade his personal space, or step back and surrender the position. Charles stepped back. Sebastian kept walking, smooth and unhurried, until Charles's back was nearly against the wall. Then Sebastian stopped, turned slightly, and surveyed the room like he was inspecting property he already owned. The power center had shifted. Charles was no longer in control of the space. Sebastian was. Isabella slipped in behind them, moving to the staircase where she had a clear view of everything but stayed out of the immediate confrontation zone. Marco remained by the door, hands clasped in front of him, blocking the exit. "Where's Vivian?" Sebastian asked. Upstairs. Resting. Charles's voice had an edge now. The friendly mask was cracking. She has a headache. I'm sure she does. Sebastian picked up a framed photo from the side table. It showed a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, smiling next to a younger Isabella. Both of them looked happy. The photo was at least 2 years old, judging by how much Isabella had grown. Call her down. She's sleeping. Now. The word hung in the air like a blade. Charles's face flushed red, but he didn't move. Sebastian could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. If he refused, he looked weak. If he complied, he lost control of his own house. Either way, he was losing. Vivian. Charles shouted toward the stairs. Too loud. Aggressive. Get down here. There was a long pause. Then footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs. She was beautiful, even through the exhaustion that hung on her like a coat. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun. A long-sleeved shirt despite the warm night. She moved carefully, like someone who'd learned that quick movements brought consequences. Her eyes found Isabella first. Then Sebastian. Confusion flickered across her face. Mama, Isabella said quietly. It's okay. He's here to help. Vivian's gaze shifted to Charles, searching for permission to speak. That one gesture told Sebastian everything he needed to know about how this house operated. Come down, Sebastian said gently. Please. Vivian descended the stairs, each step measured. When she reached the bottom, Sebastian saw what the long sleeves were hiding. Her left wrist was wrapped in an elastic bandage. Fresh. The kind you put on after a sprain. Or after someone grabbed you hard enough to leave marks. Charles moved then, trying to reclaim his position in the center of the room. But Sebastian had already anticipated it. He shifted his weight, angling his body so that Charles had to either stop short or physically push past him. Charles stopped. Vivian, these people are trespassing, Charles said, his voice taking on a wounded quality. Playing the victim now. Switching tactics. I think we should call the police. Go ahead, Sebastian said calmly. He pulled out his phone, held it out to Charles. Call them. I'm sure they'd love to hear about the offshore accounts you've been running through Bennett Architecture. The ghost projects. The money laundering. All the things you've been using your wife's credentials to hide. Charles's face went white. Sebastian took one step forward. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. Claiming more space. Or, Sebastian continued, you can sit down, shut up, and let the adults handle this. He gestured to the couch, a dismissive, almost casual movement. But the message was clear. This wasn't Charles's house anymore. It was Sebastian's. And Charles had just been demoted to guest. Charles sat. He tried to make it look like his choice, lowering himself onto the couch with exaggerated casualness, but everyone in the room knew the truth. Sebastian had given an order, and Charles had obeyed. Vivian stood frozen near the stairs, her hand gripping the banister like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes kept darting between Isabella and Charles, trying to understand what was happening. Isabella, what did you do? Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. Well, you couldn't, Isabella said. She walked to the coffee table and set down the evidence box with a small click. I got help. Sebastian remained standing, positioned between Charles and the two women. Marco had moved deeper into the room now, cutting off any route to the back door. The net was tightening, and Charles could feel it. I want you to leave, Charles said, trying to sound authoritative. All of you. This is a private family matter. It stopped being private when you started using Vivian's name to commit federal crimes. Sebastian nodded to Isabella. Show them. Isabella opened the evidence box and pulled out the digital recorder. It was small, silver, the kind journalists used. Her fingers found the play button. A voice crackled through the speaker. Charles's voice, loud and slurred with alcohol. You think you're so smart. You think anyone's gonna believe you over me? I own you. This house, your job, your daughter, all of it belongs to me. A crash. The sound of something breaking. Charles, please, Vivian's voice trembling. Please what? Please stop. Please don't hurt you. You brought this on yourself. Another crash. Then a sound that made Sebastian's jaw clench. A sharp smack, followed by a choked sob. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. Charles lunged forward, reaching for the recorder. Turn that off. Sebastian's hand shot out, gripping Charles's wrist mid-reach. Not hard enough to break anything. Just hard enough to stop him completely. Sit. Down. Charles sat. Isabella stopped the recording. That was from last Tuesday. I have 5 more just like it. Different days. Different rooms. All the same pattern. She looked at her mother. I put the recorder in my backpack and left it in the kitchen. He never noticed. People don't pay attention to kid stuff. Isabella. Vivian's voice broke. You can't, this isn't safe. Isabella finished. Nothing about this house is safe, Mama. That's why I had to do something. She pressed play again. This time, the recording was different. Quieter. The sound of someone breathing heavily, talking to themselves. Account 77329 password. Horizon Capital 2-0-2-3. Charles went rigid. Transfer complete. 40,000 cleared through Vivian's project code. No flags. Morrison's too stupid to check the invoices anyway. A pause. Then Charles's voice again, drowsy now, half asleep. Bennett's gonna make me partner. All because of her signature. Stupid woman doesn't even know what she's signing. The recording clicked off. The silence in the room was crushing. Vivian stared at Charles like she was seeing him for the first time. You've been using my projects? My certifications? I can explain, Charles started. She recorded you in your sleep. Sebastian interrupted, almost impressed. For how long? 3 weeks, Isabella said. He talks in his sleep when he drinks, which is most nights. I got account numbers, passwords, transfer amounts, names of people he's working with. All of it. She pulled out the small notebook, flipped it open. I wrote everything down. Cross-referenced it with the papers in his office. It all matches. Sebastian took the notebook, scanning the meticulous handwriting. Account numbers from 3 different banks. Dates. Transaction amounts. This wasn't just evidence of domestic abuse. This was a complete financial breakdown of a money laundering operation. You're 7, Sebastian said again, this time with something close to respect. 7.5, Isabella corrected. And I'm really good at patterns. Charles stood up suddenly, his face twisted with rage. You little. He didn't get to finish. Marco moved like liquid, positioning himself directly in Charles's path. Sebastian didn't even turn around. I wouldn't, Sebastian said quietly. Charles looked at Marco, then at Sebastian, then at the recorder still sitting on the table. The evidence of everything he'd done, everything he'd said, all the secrets he thought were buried. His face crumbled. What do you want? He asked, his voice hollow. Sebastian smiled. Now we're getting somewhere. Vivian moved to Isabella, pulling her daughter close. The protective gesture was automatic, even though the real danger in the room had already been neutralized. Her hand smoothed down Isabella's messy braids, and that's when Sebastian saw it. A necklace. Thin silver chain. Small pendant shaped like a compass rose. Sebastian's world tilted. He'd bought that necklace from a street vendor in Barcelona 10 years ago. Had it engraved with coordinates, 37.7749 degrees north, 122.4194 degrees west, San Francisco. The place where he'd told Vivian he loved her for the first and only time. The place where he'd walked away. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, as if he could feel the ghost of that moment. He'd been younger then. Stupider. Convinced that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. So he'd left in the middle of the night, disappeared into his work, buried himself so deep in the syndicate that feelings became irrelevant. He'd told himself she'd forget him. She'd kept the necklace. Vivian caught him staring. Her eyes widened with recognition, and Sebastian watched 10 years of buried history crash into the present. Her hand flew to the pendant, fingers closing around it protectively. Sebastian. Her voice was barely audible. Charles's head snapped up. You know him. Nobody answered. The room had shrunk to just 2 people, Sebastian and Vivian, staring at each other across a decade of silence. Isabella looked between them, her sharp mind piecing together something she hadn't expected. You know each other? We used to, Vivian whispered. Her eyes were filling with tears, but not from pain this time. From something more complicated. A long time ago. Sebastian's throat felt tight. He forced himself to stay focused, to push down the wave of emotions threatening to break through his carefully constructed walls. But his eyes kept drifting to Isabella. 7.5 years old. 10 years since he'd left. The math was screaming at him, but he didn't want to hear it. When? He asked quietly. Vivian understood the question. 2.5 years after you left. I didn't know where you were. Didn't know how to find you. I tried, but you disappeared completely. Wait, Charles said, standing up again. His voice had turned sharp and ugly. "Wait, are you telling me?" He looked at Isabella. Really looked at her for the first time. Then back at Sebastian. Sebastian saw it happening in slow motion. Saw Charles putting together the pieces. The timeline. The resemblance he'd been too self-absorbed to notice before. Isabella's analytical mind. Her tactical thinking. The way she could read people and situations with scary accuracy. She hadn't learned that from Vivian's kindness. She'd inherited it from someone else. "She's not mine," Charles said, his voice rising. "All this time, she's not even mine? You never treated her like she was." Vivian shot back, her fear temporarily replaced by anger. "You tolerated her. Used her as leverage against me. Don't pretend you suddenly care about biology." Isabella's hand had gone to her mouth. She was looking at Sebastian with those old soul eyes. Eyes he now realized were a mirror of his own. "You're my father," she said. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered with the same analytical certainty she used for everything else. Sebastian couldn't speak. His entire identity was built on being untouchable. Unattached. Clean. He'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of having no weaknesses, no vulnerabilities, no ties that could be exploited. And now he was staring at the biggest vulnerability of his life. A daughter he'd never known existed. A daughter who'd broken through his security, handed him evidence of a crime, and looked at him like he was the solution to every problem she'd ever faced. "I didn't know," he said finally. The words felt inadequate. "Vivian, I swear I didn't know." "I know." Vivian's voice was soft. "I tried to tell you, but you were gone. And then Charles came along, and he seemed safe. Stable. He promised to take care of us." A bitter laugh escaped her. Funny how that worked out. Isabella stepped away from her mother, walking toward Sebastian. She stopped 3 feet away, studying his face. "You have the same eyes," she said quietly. "I always wondered why mine looked different from Mama's." Sebastian crouched down, bringing himself to her level. "Isabella." "It's okay," she interrupted. "You didn't know. And you came anyway. That matters." Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. All of it. You can't just break into my house and accuse me of—" "Sit down," Sebastian said without looking at him. His eyes were still on Isabella, on the daughter he'd just discovered, on the world that had just reorganized itself around this one impossible fact. "I don't have to listen to." Marco took 1 step forward. Charles sat. Isabella's expression had shifted. The vulnerability from a moment ago was gone, replaced by the analytical focus Sebastian was beginning to recognize. She was compartmentalizing, the way he did, pushing aside the emotional revelation to deal with the tactical problem at hand. She really was his daughter. "We need to finish this," Isabella said quietly. She looked at her mother. "Mama, can you show him your wrist?" Vivian hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to hide the bandage. "Please," Isabella pressed. "He needs to see." Slowly, Vivian pulled back her sleeve and unwrapped the elastic bandage. The bruising underneath was ugly. Dark purple fingerprints wrapped around her wrist in a clear grip pattern. For fingers on one side, thumb on the other. "Charles said you fell," Isabella stated, looking at her stepfather. "That you tripped on the stairs and caught yourself wrong. That's what you told the neighbor who heard Mama cry out, right?" Charles's jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. Isabella pulled a folder from her backpack. Inside was a science project poster board, folded in half. She opened it on the coffee table. The title read, "Force and Motion, How Objects Fall versus How They're Pushed." "I did this project last month," Isabella explained. "We had to study Newton's laws. When something falls, gravity pulls it straight down. The force is distributed evenly across whatever surface it hits." She pointed to a diagram showing a stick figure falling and landing on an outstretched hand. "But when someone grabs you," she continued, flipping to another diagram, "the force is concentrated in specific points. Fingers. Each finger creates its own pressure point. And if the person is angry, pulling or twisting, the bruises follow the direction of the force." She turned to Sebastian. "Look at Mama's wrist. The bruises are darker on the thumb side and lighter on the finger side. That's because Charles was right-handed, and he grabbed her from the front. His thumb pressed harder because that's how grip mechanics work. The bruises also spiral slightly toward her elbow. That means he didn't just grab, he twisted." Sebastian examined the injury with clinical precision. Isabella was right. The bruise pattern showed clear torsion rotation. This wasn't from a fall. If Mama had fallen and caught herself, Isabella said, the bruising would be on the palm side of her hand, or across the heel of her palm where it would hit the stair. Not wrapped around the wrist in a grip pattern. The physics don't match the story. You're a child, Charles spat. You don't know what you're talking about. I got an A+ on this project, Isabella replied calmly. My teacher said I had the best understanding of applied force in the whole 7th grade. And I've been studying Mama's injuries for 3 months. Every time you said she fell, or bumped into something, or was clumsy, I measured. I documented. I compared the injury patterns to the explanation. She pulled out another paper, hand-drawn diagrams of a human body with different colored marks. Red for fresh injuries, blue for old ones. Each one labeled with a date and Charles's explanation. February 3rd, bruise on upper left arm. Charles said Mama walked into a door. But doors hit the shoulder or elbow when you walk into them, not the middle of the upper arm. That's a grab mark. February 17th, bruise on ribcage. Charles said Mama slipped getting out of the shower. But shower falls create scrapes from tile, not isolated impact bruises. That's from a punch or a shove into a corner. She kept going, her voice steady, clinical. Each injury matched with its false explanation, then compared against what the actual physics would require. Sebastian had seen crime scene analysts with less attention to detail. Vivian was crying now, quietly, her hand over her mouth. Charles had gone pale. You've been spying on us? Recording us? That's illegal. So is assault, Isabella said flatly. And fraud. And money laundering. Want to compare which crimes are worse? Sebastian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Interesting timing, he said quietly. Charles looked up, suspicion flickering across his face. What? Sebastian turned the phone, so Charles could see the message. It was from his financial manager, time-stamped 3 minutes ago. Acquisition complete. Meridian Holdings now under DeLuca umbrella. All accounts frozen pending audit. The color drained from Charles's face. Meridian Holdings, Sebastian said conversationally, pocketing his phone. That's the offshore firm you've been using to launder money through Vivian's architectural projects. Nice setup, really. Ghost buildings that exist only on paper. Fake invoices. Construction budgets for projects that never break ground. The money comes in dirty, gets filtered through a legitimate architectural firm, and comes out clean on the other side. He walked slowly around the coffee table, his white shirt still immaculate despite everything. You made one mistake, though. You got greedy. Started using my supply lines to move your product. My shipping routes. My distribution networks. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Charles's hands were shaking now. I wasn't. You were, Sebastian interrupted. And worse, you were sloppy about it. Left a trail wide enough for a 7-year-old to follow. He gestured to Isabella. Which, ironically, is exactly what happened. Isabella stood a little straighter, pride flickering across her face. When Isabella showed me those account numbers, Sebastian continued, I made a few calls. Turns out Meridian Holdings was looking for investors. Their CEO was very motivated to sell after I explained certain financial irregularities that might interest the federal government. We settled on a price. Very reasonable, considering. You can't do that, Charles said, his voice rising. That's my operation. It was your operation. Past tense. Sebastian's voice was ice. As of 7:43 p.m. tonight, Meridian Holdings is a wholly owned subsidiary of DeLuca Enterprises. Which means every transaction you've ever made, every account you've ever touched, every dollar you've ever moved, I own it. All of it. He pulled out his phone again, scrolled through another message. Let's see. $47,000 moved through Vivian's Bennett architecture project codes in the last 6 months. Another $63,000 through fake subcontractor payments. $82,000 in fraudulent material costs. That's $192,000 in documented fraud. Using your wife's professional credentials without her knowledge or consent. Vivian gasped. Charles, that could destroy my career. He didn't care, Isabella said quietly. That was the point. If you got caught, you'd take the fall. He'd claim he didn't know anything. That you were the one running the scheme. Charles lurched to his feet. You can't prove that. I don't need to prove anything, Sebastian said. I own the company now. Which means I own the records. The files. The paper trail. And I can do whatever I want with them. I can turn them over to the FBI. Or I can bury them so deep they never see daylight. He let that sink in for a moment. The question is, which option do I choose? Charles's face had gone from pale to gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead. What do you want? A signature, Sebastian said simply. He nodded to Marco, who pulled a document from inside his jacket and placed it on the coffee table. This is a confession. It details every fraudulent transaction you've made through Meridian Holdings. It also includes a signed statement that Vivian Laurent had no knowledge of your activities and that you used her professional credentials without consent. I'm not signing that. Then I call the FBI right now. They'll be very interested in your operation. And when they investigate, they won't just find the fraud. They'll find the recordings Isabella made, the documented abuse, the pattern of violence. You'll face federal charges and criminal charges. You'll lose everything. Sebastian leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Or you sign. You walk away from this house, this family, and this city. Tonight. Forever. And maybe, I decide the federal government doesn't need to know about Meridian Holdings just yet. Charles stared at the document. His hands were trembling. Where do I sign? Charles signed with shaking hands. Marco witnessed the document, folded it precisely, and tucked it back into his jacket. Within 15 minutes, Charles had packed a single suitcase and was being escorted to a car that would take him to the airport. Sebastian's people would make sure he got on a plane. Where it went didn't matter, as long as it was far away. The house felt different after he left. Bigger somehow. Like a pressure had been released, and the walls could finally breathe. Vivian sat on the couch, staring at her hands. She hadn't said much since Charles walked out the door. Isabella sat next to her, close but not touching, like she wasn't sure if comfort was allowed yet. Sebastian stood by the window, watching Marco's taillights disappear down the street. His white shirt had a small smudge near the collar now, dirt from where Isabella had grabbed his sleeve earlier. It bothered him more than it should. He'd built his entire identity around staying clean, staying separate from the mess of the world. Now the mess was his daughter. I should go, he said quietly, not turning around. Give you two some space. Time to process everything. Don't. Vivian's voice was soft but firm. Please. Not again. Sebastian turned. She was looking at him with those same eyes he'd fallen in love with a decade ago. Tired now. Marked by years he hadn't been there for. But still her. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be this. A father? Isabella asked. A person, Sebastian corrected. Someone who stays. Isabella stood up and walked over to her backpack, still sitting by the door. She pulled out something wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. When she unwrapped it, Sebastian saw a small robotic arm, the kind from a build-it-yourself kit. One of the joints was broken, the plastic cracked and hanging loose. I've been trying to fix this for 2 months, Isabella said, bringing it over to him. It's supposed to pick up objects and move them, but the servo motor keeps jamming. I thought maybe you could help. Sebastian took the broken toy carefully. I don't know anything about robotics. But you know about systems, Isabella said. About how things work together. How to find the weak point and fix it. She pulled out the instruction manual, dog-eared and covered in pencil notes. I've tried everything in the book. But maybe I'm missing something. Sebastian sat down on the floor, spreading out the pieces. Isabella sat across from him, handing him tools from her backpack. A small screwdriver set, electrical tape, a pair of needle-nose pliers. They worked in silence for a while. Sebastian examined the servo motor, testing the connections. The problem wasn't the motor itself, it was the plastic housing around it. It had warped from stress, creating friction. Here, he said, showing Isabella. The plastic bent. Probably from being forced too hard. We need to heat it slightly, reshape it, then let it cool. How do we heat it without melting it? Hot water. Controlled temperature. Sebastian looked at Vivian. Do you have a thermometer? 20 minutes later, they had the plastic reshaped and the motor moving smoothly. Isabella's face lit up when the robotic arm successfully picked up a pencil and moved it across the table. It works. She threw her arms around Sebastian without thinking. He froze for a moment, then slowly wrapped his arms around her. She was small and warm and smelled like grape juice and dirt. His white shirt was definitely ruined now, grease stains from the motor, dust from the carpet, wrinkles from sitting on the floor. He'd never cared less about clothing in his life. Thank you, Isabella whispered into his shoulder. Sebastian looked over her head at Vivian, who was crying again. But this time she was smiling too. "I have a guest room," Vivian said quietly. "Two, actually. If you wanted to stay. Just for tonight. Or longer. Whatever you're ready for." Sebastian thought about his mansion. The pristine white walls. The guards. The life he'd built around being untouchable and alone. Then he looked down at Isabella, still holding on to him like he might disappear if she let go. "I'll stay," he said. And for the first time in 15 years, Sebastian DeLuca chose to be visible.